welcome to In the Red Zone with Matt and Cal. I'm Matt.
And I'm Henry, filling in for Cal.
Yes, Cal is out again, but he'll be back soon, so don't worry. So last time we didn't have enough time to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. We spent way too much time in Dallas. So we apologize for that. So we're going to give us a very quick rundown of Philadelphia Eagles. Go.
Okay, well, as far as I see it, the Eagles, they build a little for next team. Chip Kelly's innovations will surprise some teams, but eventually they'll be shut down, finish around 6-10 or 7-9.
I see them going 6-10. Chip Kelly has a lot of work to do, and he's at Oregon. He was more on offense, not so much on defense. There's a quarterback controversy or a position battle between Michael Vick, Nick Foles, and Matt Barkley. Just have to see there. I think Nick Foles get it, but that's not important. And then we see the running game is going to be interesting too, with
LaShawn
McCoy, sorry. Then you have the receivers, a lot of them there. So we're going to have to see how they do. And then their defense is also up for grabs because they lost Nnamdi Asomugha and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie.
Mm-hmm. And Jeremy Maclin hurt. Long story short, the dream team's dead, people. Let's go to the NFC North.
All right, so going to the NFC North, who do you have going first?
I think the Packers, but not by that big of a margin. I think the NFC North as a division is really kind of degrading in quality. This is a division where all four teams have made the playoffs in the past few years. I think the Packers will win, but I think they'll go 11-5 at the best, especially now that Brian Beluga on the offensive line is injured. The NFC North, I think, is going to be the best division this year as far as win goes. So I have the Green Bay Packers going 11-5, the same as last year, but I just see the 11-5, and now 11-5 is still good. Aaron Rodgers is amazing. And I think he'll be good this year. He only had 8 picks last year, 39 touchdowns. And the starting running back, they needed a running back for who knows how long, and they didn't go to the draft. This year they went to Eddie Lacy, and I like him a lot. I think he's going to be a great running back. I think he'll start off, and I think he'll do really well. Mm-hmm. Well, Aaron Rodgers, obviously, when you have a top-tier quarterback like that, gives you double-digit wins. Eddie Lacy, he could be good, but I think someone to really watch here is Jonathan Franklin. He was a 4th-round pick for the Packers, but a lot of people out of training camp are saying that he could actually win the starting job away from Eddie Lacy. Eddie Lacy, yeah, he dominated Notre Dame in the BCS title game, but Jonathan Franklin might actually be the better overall running back. I think you could really see him take the reins and give the Packers a solid core that they haven't had since the days of James Starks in 2010.
Yeah, it's been a long time since they've had a good running back. So under the receivers now, more or less, they got some players out that they're going to miss. Greg Jennings missed most of the season, and they still went 11-5. So he has a great history with the Packers too, but now he's into Minnesota, so I think he's going to be missed.
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg Jennings, he only played 8 games last year, and he really did not put up huge numbers when he was in. He only had a few token catches. Really, the big offensive weapon for the Packers right now is Randall Cobb. He had a 77% catch rate, highest in the league, which shows his versatility in screen passes. Not to mention, he was the top-ranked wide receiver when running the ball over guys like Percy Harvin. I think Randall Cobb is a versatile offensive weapon that can really be Green Bay's Percy Harvin or one of those more versatile, smaller guys.
Well, yeah, then they also lost Donald Driver, which isn't important because he only played 1 game, so he's retired, so that's not much. But you do have Randall Cobb. Randall Cobb is going to step up. And you have James Jones, who's well too, and then you have Jordy Nelson. If he stays healthy, can be good too. So I see the receiving core being really well.
Jordy Nelson's a concern, though. He's already out for training camp this year.
Yeah, so that's a huge concern, and I don't think they're going to throw him right back into the game and have Aaron Rodgers really key on him a lot in the beginning. And then you have Jermichael Finley, the tight end. It's also a big part of their offense.
Well, Jermichael Finley's a little iffy. He's really inconsistent. He has a bigger mouth than he does hands. I mean, sometimes the guy doesn't look like he could catch a cold, but other times he's your top tight end receiving threat. He's really inconsistent. He's coming into his 6th year. I think this is really a make-or-break year for him. If he doesn't do well this year, I don't think he'll find success as a top-tier tight end.
And along the lines, he also needs to learn how to block. I mean, their offensive line was terrible. 51 sacks they gave up last year. And went to the draft, and they drafted 2 new guys, J.C. Treader, to be the replacement for Jeff Saturday, who didn't even do well in Green Bay. Still got voted to the Pro Bowl.
He was benched at the end of the year. That was a joke selection.
Yeah, I know, but just of his history, I don't really know. But they had that replacement there. So then we go to defense. Mike Neal did an okay job at the end, and then you have AJ Hawk, 120 tackles. He's still great. Brad Jones only started 10 games, so they had to fit him in. And then Clay Matthews had 13 sacks, so he's a great outside linebacker. And Casey Hayward, 6 picks in his rookie year and 21 defended passes.
Well, the thing about the Packers defense is they've always been a bend don't break team. They were not very high in the league in yards per game, but they were actually 11th in the league in points allowed. So they get a lot of interceptions, they get a lot of red zone stops. I think who you really have to rely on is Clay Matthews. Can he stay healthy? Can he rush the passer? Because as the NFL becomes more and more of a passing league, you really need your guys like Clay Matthews on the outside and B.J. Raji in the middle to stop those Peyton Mannings and Tom Brady stepping up into the pocket.
Well, I think a big part of their offseason is going to be trying to find a safety opposite between M.D. Jennings and Jaron McMillan now that Woodson is gone. So Jennings had 1 pick last year. He's a second-year player. And McMillan had 1 interception, 5 passes defended. So nobody put up great numbers, really worth to start.
But neither really did Charles Woodson. He was injured a good portion of the season, and he's really not as fast as he used to be. That's why they put him to safety. He's still a pretty good run stopper, at least for a former cornerback. But the Raiders overpaid for him in free agency. It wasn't a great move, and I think the Packers really will be better without Charles Woodson being able to move on, find new guys, and find their safety of the future.
That's an interesting opinion on that. So you have them going 11-5, as do I, first place. So who do you have going in second place?
Second place, I have the Chicago Bears at 9-7. Now, I don't think the Chicago Bears defense will have as many opportunities. A plus 24 turnover ratio is not something you can normally repeat. Tillman and Jennings both had great years, 9 picks for Jennings, 10 forced fumbles for Tillman. I don't see them having the same success, but I do think their offense will be slightly improved under the tutelage of Mark Trestman, former Alouettes coach. And let me say, the Alouettes are in disarray without Mark Trestman right now. They just fired their head coach because their offense has been doing so terribly.
Well, I think Mark Trestman is a great coach. The Canadian Football League is just only this much different from regular football, but he won the back-to-back CFL championships in 2009, 2010, was also Coach of the Year. But I think Chicago goes 8-8 this year. I don't think they can break a winning record. I mean, I'd like to give them more, but I think they have tough games. Last year, they played the AFC South last year. So, you had Houston and Indianapolis tough, but then you had Tennessee and Jacksonville. This year, you have to play Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Cincinnati. Cleveland's also tough there, but those are the 3 main. So those are big games that you have to do well against, and they're good teams. So, they have a tougher schedule than last year.
Mm-hmm. And it's really going to be hard, especially stopping the run last year. They're missing Brian Urlacher. They brought in DJ Williams to replace him, and while he may be a more athletic option than Urlacher, he can't replace the leadership or the veteran savvy that Urlacher has, and DJ Williams is known to struggle with off-the-field problems. The offensive line is still a question. They brought in Bushrod from the Saints, who, let's face it, Drew Brees made him look a lot better than he was. Cutler tends to hold on to the ball a little too long. He could be in for another rough season, and this is his contract year. He needs a good season this year. Matt Forte will probably improve over his numbers last year.
Jay Cutler, he's just kind of any other way to put it. He's just weird, He does great things and he does awful things, He's a decent quarterback. I mean, I think Chicago's just going to stick with him as their starter now, and he hangs on to the ball for a long time. But I think he can lead his team 8-8.
Well, the thing about Cutler is he tends not to learn from his mistakes like a quarterback with maybe a higher emotional maturity level. Now, some people criticize Cutler a lot. Some people rush to defend him. Some people like his aloof personality. But I think if he took a little bit more of a humble personality, if he tried to stay out of the limelight, be more of a student of the game, more of a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady, he could minimize some of those mistakes. He wouldn't throw off his back foot as much. He wouldn't underthrow receivers as much. I think he and Brandon Marshall, if Cutler learns to minimize his mistakes, can really become one of the top duos in the league.
I don't see them becoming one of the top duos in the league just because of Jay Cutler. I mean, as long as Jay Cutler is the starter, he's gonna stay in the light, and I think he's gonna have that kind of attitude, you know. And Brandon Marshall, not taking anything away from him, he was great, you know. He was second in catches, third in yards, you know. So he's great, you know. And Jay Cutler keys him a lot. But I just don't see Jay Cutler and Brandon Marshall being like Tom Brady and Randy Moss.
Well, when you talk about Brandon Marshall, I think his numbers were really inflated because he was the only option on that team. Their tight ends were awful. Alshon Jeffrey was the next best receiver on that team, and he really struggled his rookie year. Maybe he can break out this year. Oftentimes receivers break out in their second or third years. But I think they need to find some more offensive weapons. They brought in Martellus Bennett. That's a big step up. He'll be able to provide a security blanket for Cutler. And if they can get that running game going with Matt Forte, their offense could be enough to win them some games that they couldn't last year, even with their defense taking a step down.
Well, Matt Forte doesn't do well by himself. He does well with Michael Bush. They had a combined 1,500 yards. So by himself, he can't really handle it. But as long as Michael Bush is with him too, I like where they're going, and I think he likes where they're going too. And also, Michael Bush, I think, likes where it's going. You know, he probably wants to start, but you have that too. And then you also have Matt Forte. He also catches a lot of passes too, so that's another option for Jay Cutler. As far as defense goes, Lance Briggs was their top tackler, and he's still there. Even though without Urlacher, it's going to be a tough ride, I think. And then you have to talk about the great cornerback core, I think. You have Charles Tillman, who's been been playing for 10 years. He had 10 forced fumbles. I mean, every single tackle, it would be this, and then it would be a swat, you know? It would be towards the ball. And then the other side, you have Tim Jennings, who had 9 interceptions. So, you know, what receiver do you go to? The slot guy, you know?
Well, the thing, it's a pair of great cornerbacks, no question about it, but I don't think they can replicate the turnover success they had last year. The tendency of teams with high turnover margins is to kind of regress or progress if they're under to the median, and I don't see them winning all those turnover battles that they did last year. I think their defense takes a step back, even if their offense does make a leap forward.
Okay, well, you know, the turnovers is a huge part. So we're going to have to see if they can still generate those turnovers or if they're going to break down. So I think, you know, they were 10-6 last year, and I think just 8-8 last year. I don't, you know, those 2 games, that difference, you know, they were close, they had some close games, you know, and again, I don't think Jay Cutler can really come through for his team. So what do you have their record going?
I say 9-7, you know. For all Jay Cutler's faults, he is normally a good quarterback when it comes down to crunch time.
And I have them 8-8. So who you have going third?
Third, I have none other than the Minnesota Vikings. Last year's Cinderella story, 11-5. Adrian Peterson gets 9 yards short of the rushing record. Now, with that kind of rushing success, I don't think it's possible to repeat that. This team, it's going to have to depend on Christian Ponder a little bit more this year. And last year, he did not have a touchdown pass of more than 20 yards. Percy Harvin went out early. They're missing him this year. Who knows, with Greg Jennings and a couple of those rookie receivers, maybe their passing game could take a step forward. This is really a make-or-break year for Ponder as their franchise quarterback.
Well, you have a lot of good points. What did you have their record going?
I have them at 8-8.
Well, this was a tough decision for me, but third place I have Detroit Lions going, and so I will talk about them in a second. But let me talk about the Minnesota Vikings. I have them in last at 7-9, under 500. You know, I think last year was kind of a fluke, going 10-6. I think that was I think they were overrated, and they just barely pulled out those games. You know. And yes, Christian Ponder surprised us all. I mean, with his first
with his, he came out of the draft. They had all these other players that could have drafted, and they drafted Christian Ponder. He did surprise us, but he's really not that good, just plain and simple. He threw for under 4,000 yards, threw for under 3,000 yards, He had 18 touchdowns, 12 picks, so not that big of a difference here. So they really need to switch up quarterbacks, I think. Can't do it this year. They have Matt Castle, who was awful at Kansas City, But, they got to think about their priorities at quarter.
I wouldn't sleep on Christian Ponder just yet. When you think about Minnesota's history of quarterbacks, they had Brett Favre, and they've had Randall Cunningham back in the 90s. But then you have to go all the way back to Fran Tarkenton to find a guy that really does well. Christian Ponder, against the Broncos last year, or rather 2 years ago at this point, broke the rookie receiving record for the Vikings. I think some of that showcases he has the NFL ability with a little bit more confidence, and relying on Adrian Peterson, Kyle Rudolph, and Greg Jennings now, I think he'll be able to take the next step and start winning some games, not just being carried by his team.
I don't think he wins the game. I think Adrian Peterson wins the games. I think he relies on Adrian Peterson because he has to, because he can. Adrian Peterson can come through for this team, but I don't see him really sticking around for much longer.
Well, when you look at quarterback, it's the most important position in the National Football League. But people tend to take Christian Ponder for granted. Look at last year, Week 17, the Vikings win a shootout against the Packers. Adrian Peterson has an unbelievable game, and Christian Ponder really has a good game. He helps them beat the Packers. Next week, Christian Ponder's out, Joe Webb's in, and it is ugly for the Vikings.
And then, so on the receiving core, the loss of Percy Harvin hurts a little. I mean, the thing that hurts most about is probably their field position. He had 35-yard average on his returns, and as far as receiving goes, he was the top receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. But really, not that key. He's not very elite. So they got Greg Jennings. That's a good deal. 5 years, $45 million. I think that's just about where he should be.
Yeah, when you talk about last year, the top receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, that's like being the tallest leprechaun. I mean, he only played a few games that year. It really didn't take much. That was Adrian Peterson's team, especially the last 10 games of the year.
And then they had 3 first-round draft picks, and they took their third first-round draft pick was Cordero Patterson from Tennessee, and I like him a lot, and I think he could be second, third receiver.
He definitely has first-round talent. It's his rookie year, so you got to taper your expectations a little. But I think in the future he could develop into a very good receiver for the Vikings, assuming Christian Ponder can take that next step and help his receivers get better.
And then to catch those passes, you need an offensive line. I think their offensive line did a great job, about 2 sacks per game.
They're great run blockers. I think some of those sack numbers, it was a little limited because they ran the ball so much, and because Christian Ponder is really more limited to short passes. But they are a good offensive line. With that running game, I don't think pressure is really all that much of a problem. I think Christian Ponder will be given the opportunity to succeed. He has to go out there and take it.
So then on the defensive side, I like their defense a lot, and their pressure on the quarterback. Jared Allen had 12 sacks. Brian Robinson had 8. And then Everson Griffin, he only started 1 game, but he played in all 16 and had 8 sacks. And then they have good D tackles too, but I'm really excited about their other first-round pick, Sheriff Floyd, from Florida. I like what he did at Florida too. And then you have Chad Greenway at 148 total tackles, and Aaron Henderson did well. And then you have Desmond Bishop, who hasn't done much, and I think they paid him way too much. I don't even know if they should have signed him. But that's about their D end and linebacker thing. I like how they are.
I think when you look at the Vikings defense, you really have to look at their secondary, because I think that secondary can really mature really good this year. Xavier Rhodes is a solid pick. Harrison Smith, he's growing into one of the better safeties in the league. And when you get down to that front 7, Jared Allen, he's still a top-tier pass rusher, still getting it done. But let's remember, this team was 3-13 in 2011. You have to taper your expectations a little bit. They played well above their talent level.
Yeah, well, as far as their secondary goes, they released Antoine Winfield. They have A.J. Jefferson. They also have Xavier Rhodes, their other first-round draft pick, who I believe they chose was their first-round draft pick. And then they also have Josh Robinson to go there too. And like you said, Harrison Smith is a great safety. And they re-signed Jamarcus Sanford to a new 2-year deal. So I think he could start too. So as far as their secondary goes, I see kind of up and down because they got new guys, but then they have experienced guys, guys who have sparks of great talent, and guys who just kind of get blown past.
The player to watch, I think, on this defense is definitely Sheriff Floyd. A lot of people thought the Raiders would take him at number 4. He fell all the way down to the Vikings, and he provides what you need in the division of Aaron Rodgers, Jay Cutler, and Matt Stafford, that interior pass rush. With Jared Allen coming from the outside, the pass rush could be a lot improved from last year. This defense, they could be very good, but they also could fall back down to that 3-13 level if they're not careful.
Yeah, they definitely could be. They're on the cusp right now. So that's why I have them at 7-9, falling behind 500. You have them at 8-8, as falling at 500. So another down from the season last year. So then the final team that you have, Detroit Lions, and I have them going third. And the reason why I have them going third is because, for one thing, Jim Schwartz is on the hot seat right now. I mean, they make it to the playoffs, and then the next year they go 4-12. And they've had consistent early round draft picks, and they still haven't been able to really do anything. And they had 9 one-possession losses in 2012, 9 of them. If you think about it, included with their wins, that's 15-1. Just think about the possibility that they could have been 15-1.
Well, I think what's really happening here is Jim Schwartz's strategy is starting to backfire. He's always been a coach that's encouraged that borderline kind of play, really rough, edgy personality. And you see that in Sue, you see that in Fairley, and I think that's really starting to hurt them. Those personal fouls, that really kind of edgy, almost dirty play is starting to hurt them. I think that's part of why they lose close games. They make mental mistakes like those personal fouls, letting up late drives, or even Schwartz himself throwing that challenge flag versus Houston in that Thanksgiving game. They could have easily won that game if not for that challenge flag. Well, I think it starts at the top. I think they're going to have to get rid of Schwartz after a 6-10 season.
6-10, you have them going. Well, as far as Ndamukong Suh goes, I mean, I think they've tried, and they tried really hard to get his attitude, but he just has this temper. And they're not going to get rid of him because he's great, He did a great job last year. I think he had something like 12 sacks. But as far as the offense goes, Matthew Stafford, again, almost 5,000 yards. And even though it had a lower completion rate than it should have been, he had 20 touchdowns with 17 interceptions. So he's still throwing picks, But he threw the ball more than any other quarterback, 45 times a game.
More than any quarterback in NFL history at that. And you can see why when you have a threat like Calvin Johnson back there. But I want to point something out, just how much they rely on Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson and Brandon Pettigrew were the number 2 receiving duo in the NFL. Brandon Pettigrew only had around 600 yards. He's a tight end. He's not really a receiver that you'd look for. Calvin Johnson is the heart and soul of this team. Now, people say with the pickup of Reggie Bush, they're going to be more balanced. I think people are kind of ignoring Reggie Bush's skill level. He's not the running back he was at USC. Sure, at Miami he had one 1,100-yard season, but the next year he had a 900-yard season. He's not a feature back. He's all right in the passing game. He might get you 400 yards, but he really doesn't put up the kind of production that the Lions need to have an actual balanced attack. I'm worried that they're going to have to go back to just chucking up to Calvin Johnson again, seeing if he can get 2,000 yards, and maybe that'll be good enough for 6 wins.
Well, I think Matthew Stafford can do a great job. I think he has great potential. Everyone in the Lions has great potential. They always talk about how great potential because they've had the early round draft picks. But again, they lose one possession games. And Matthew Stafford has to go to Calvin Johnson. I'm not taking anything away from Calvin Johnson. He's clearly the best receiver. He's amazing. But then, one of the reasons they lost the game because clutch situations, who's Matthew Stafford going to throw to? He's going to go to Johnson. Who else does he have? Not much. He's got Brandon Pettigrew, but he doesn't have a lot. They also waived Titus Young, and Nate Burleson could be the number 2, but he's also not that great.
They also have Ryan Broyles, but another middling, low option. It's still a one-dimensional team despite their best efforts.
Yeah, and then as far as the running game goes, LeShurier did less than 4 yards a carry. So that's why they signed Reggie Bush, and I'm glad they did. That's going to help Stafford out a lot. And, Reggie Bush may not do, great. May not get 1,500 yards, may just barely get 1,000, but he's still going to help Stafford a lot. He's going to take a lot of the pressure away.
I suppose it'll help, but I think people are overrating this signing a little bit. I think Reggie Bush is the kind of running back that needs a good defense, needs a good passing game to really thrive. He's a home run hitter, but he's not going to be a consistent move the chains kind of back. I think the Lions offense remains one-dimensional. I think they have to just stick with their throw to Calvin Johnson strategy and last one more season to get a balanced offense.
Well, my thinking last year was that I was watching Detroit, in the Thanksgiving game, and I said, well, their O-line could be worse. Now that Jeff Backus is retired, it just got worse, and they lost, on the defensive side, they lost Cliff Averill to the Seahawks. So that's bad, too, because he did a great job. And their defense is kind of all over the place. They got a lot of young guys who could do that. But 11 picks and 12 forced fumbles team-wise, so they got to turn the ball over more.
The Lions secondary is really one of the worst in the league. You're talking about a team where you see Drayton Florence and Alphonso Smith play significant time. If you don't recognize either of those names, I don't blame you. Drayton Florence is washed up, and Alphonso Smith is a pick that never should have been. This team will continue to give up big passing yards, and they'll be stuck just trying to have to defend the run for the second half because they're going to dig themselves their own grave.
I see them going 8-8 because this is the year they need to get it back. So I see them going 8-8.
I don't think they have the mental fortitude to win all those close games. I think 6-10. Now the question is, do you think Stafford's worth that contract?
I do think he's worth that contract as far as Detroit goes. So I guess we're going to have to see during the season for all the teams. The NFC North is becoming one of the best divisions, if it isn't already the best division in the league. So I guess that makes our show then. This has been In the Red Zone with Matt and Cal. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.